So if you've got a Bible with you, you can turn to the book of Luke, chapter 6. We have been spending some time this summer looking at some of the different parables of Jesus. And I love this. There's so much depth, so much riches in these stories. So we're going to be looking at one today in Luke chapter 6. And I had done some of this prep before the recent fire event, and the opening line in my intro is, "Where there's smoke, there's fire." I'm not trying to be insensitive, but I'm building a point here, right? We understand that's a saying that we'll use, but we understand if you see smoke, something's got to be causing it. We'll sometimes refer to things as the tip of the iceberg, because we understand that when you see an iceberg, we don't have those in the Okanagan, but a chunk of ice, it's like, wow, that's really big. But we know if you can see a piece above the water, there's a big piece under the water. Not to sound too horticultural, but if you see a flower growing in your garden or on the side of the road or in a meadow somewhere, a flower blossom means, if you see that, you can reasonably infer that there is dirt and roots down there somewhere in order for there to be a flower blossom. In nature, it tends to be the case. Sorry if my mic is clicking here. I've got to try not to move my face. In nature, the surface appearance of things it tends to reliably indicate the reality below the surface. And so we can kind of learn the rules about how things work. But when it comes to us as humans, we're clever, and we've become really good at reproducing surface effects without the underlying foundation. So we would say, yeah, generally speaking, where there's smoke, there's fire. But then we've invented smoke machines. And like my shop teacher used to say, any machine can be a smoke machine if you misuse it hard enough. That's just a little tip. That's for free. You can take that. But we make smoke machines. You can make artificial flowers. One of my favorite kinds, right? It's the blossom without all of the hassle of dirt and roots and having to water it and bugs and things. And we do this. We pay attention to the surface. We can wear makeup. We even, clothing is good. I'm not saying we should, you're just trying to hide what's under the surface. Absolutely, do that, right? But we know, if you spend any time on social media, you see a surface version of a person's life and a person's situation or a person's relationship, and there's a reality under it, but the picture is it's wanting to give the impression of a certain reality that may or may not be there. There's a term that has been bounced around a little bit. I haven't come across it as much recently, so I don't know if I'm super out of touch, but this idea of virtue signaling. Have you heard that idea? It's often in conjunction with some kind of online presence, social media, but it's the idea of doing certain things or speaking out against certain things in a way that is prominent and posted so everyone can see, and it's basically to declare yourself as having a certain kind of virtue, right? And it depends on the virtue. Some people who will live above their means, right? Buy clothes and cars they can't afford. They're wanting to signal a certain kind of affluence, and where other people, they will intentionally look poorer because they're like, I'm not all about the money. But either way, we're good at putting things on the surface to advertise the kind of person, the kind of life, the kind of underlying reality that we would like people to believe we have. But it doesn't necessarily have to correlate with what's really there. We're really good at making those two things intentionally not line up. Because as humans, we tend to place a lot of value, oftentimes more value, on appearances than on the substance that the appearance is communicating. We're going to look at a parable today in Luke chapter 6, verses 47 to 49, near the end of the chapter. It's a well-known story called the parable of the two builders. And in this parable, Jesus addresses this tendency to say one thing, to communicate one thing that is not necessarily, it's not pointing to the truth under the surface. And he tells us essentially that while pretending may fool other people, it may even fool ourselves, The storms of life will inevitably reveal the truth. The truth is that it is the foundation, it is the core, it's the reality inside that actually counts. So we're going to look at Luke chapter 6, verses 47 to 49. I'm going to pull it up on here because once again in the scramble, I've got my notes and I don't have my text. This is a well-known parable. It also shows up in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount. And, sorry guys, new phone and my Bible app is like, you need to set this all up. I've got to do this for the second time in 3 weeks. Does someone have a physical Bible I can borrow? Because my phone is saying, nope, you lose. Thank you so much. I'll get it back to you. Oh, this is a nice one. Look at that. Small print, you've got better eyes than I do. So this is, in context, Jesus is teaching crowds of people. Like I said, in Matthew's gospel, he puts this within the Sermon on the Mount. He's speaking to a bunch of people, and he's giving all these different lessons, and some of them are parables, some are parable-like, but this one is a parable. And so in verse 46, he says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I'll show you what they're like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete." As these parables do, Jesus uses a situation, an illustration that, thank you so much, that the people he's talking to can understand. And fortunately, this one is not super strange to us, right? He's not talking about, being a shepherd or any of those things. He's talking about a house. He's talking about the foundations underneath a house. But we see that he's addressing a certain issue. There's lots in the gospel, there could have been some conversation going on. Jesus is addressing certain people in the crowd, and we can only sort of infer what's going on from what he says. But it's pretty clear that the issue he's dealing with is essentially this idea of confession without obedience. It's signaling something with words that might not be accurate to the reality. We know that at this point in his ministry, Jesus is growing in popularity. He's got large crowds of people coming to them. And the people that are listening to Jesus have varying degrees of commitment. They ranged from his disciples who would just follow him anywhere, to those who were just curious, to those who were there to see if he would perform another miracle. We know that there would have been people present who were pretty skeptical, maybe kind of doing this, I'm not so sure about that. But there was at least a segment of them that were essentially coming and treating Jesus with a certain amount of respect, not just as a teacher with something good to say, but they're using terms of deference and respect. They're calling him Lord. That's not necessarily saying you are like the divine Son of God, but they're recognizing you have authority. And Jesus straight up says, some of you are calling me Lord, Lord, and you're not doing what I say. Why would you do that? And when we just hear it like that, it's like, well, yeah, why would we? That sounds really goofy. Why would who are they trying to fool, right? Jesus is not fooled. Do they gain something by fooling the people around them? Jesus doesn't say, are you doing this? He goes past that. He goes, why are you doing this? You are, some of you. Why are we doing this? There is, depending on our context, a pressure to, we do. We want to blend in. We want to conform, right? And so in that context, there would have been a pressure, maybe, to call Jesus Lord, to speak as though you are a committed follower. Jesus basically saying, I know what's going on, I can see what's going on, and I want you to think about it. And that's an important thing for him to say to people then and to people now, because I think it's safe to say as humans, when we start kind of investing in projecting a certain image, we're paying attention to that and not the reality that might be different. We want people to look at the surface, how we talk, how we act, where we go, the things that we post, that kind of thing. And Jesus is sort of saying, hey, maybe just turn around and look at like the reality, and if they don't line up, what's going on? So addressing this issue that was clearly happening in his day, and I think that human tendency has not gone away in our day. We're not like, that's so weird. People in the first century did that? Like they would act better than they are? Like we're experts in this. So to address it, Jesus tells this very simple parable, which is essentially two different ways of building. And he talks about two different kinds of people, and he very clearly says, I'll tell you what they're like. This person is like this person is like this. So this isn't like a super mysterious parable. He sort of, it's almost self-explanatory. But he says, there's a couple of types of people. He says, everyone who comes to me, hears my words, and does them. This is what that person's like. I want to just stop and see, okay, there's three elements to this person that he's describing. Everyone who comes to me. Now, when he initially says that, I mean, that's a physical location. He says, I'm out here teaching anyone who makes their way here to listen to what I'm saying. But I think that implies something. That implies a person is recognizing that Jesus has something to say. He is worth listening to. He has some measure of authority or wisdom. He's not just another voice in the crowd. There is a sense of recognizing something in Jesus that we need to listen to. Anyone who comes to me, he says, and then this person hears my words. Hearing isn't merely receiving the sound. It implies understanding, right? Jesus will use a figure of speech that gets translated in many of our Bibles when he's teaching sometimes, especially in parables. He'll end with saying, he who has an ear, let him hear. We're like, did they not have ears? Did a bunch of these people not have ears? What's going on? They all had ears, right? But we know you can hear something and not pay attention. Anyone who has tried to give instructions to children knows they're not hard of hearing, but they're not hearing. You know what I mean? Jesus says, anyone who comes to me and listens and grabs my words. It also implies the truth that Jesus maintains, the whole New Testament maintains, that while Jesus taught in parables, and there are definitely aspects of what Jesus did and who he is that we can't fully grasp, Jesus gave teaching and gave instructions in ways that we can understand. So sort of nested in this is the implication that none of us can say, I came and I listened, but I'm still ignorant. I have no idea what he's talking about. It's like, no, we can understand. Anyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, Jesus says. And that, I think, is basically saying anyone who comes and hears what I say and then they treat my words in a certain way. They receive them not as advice, not as optional, not as, that's a fascinating point of view. I hadn't considered that. I have to think about that for a little while. But he says people who hear them and then essentially take it as like, this has authority, I need to do this. This is like a command, this has weight. Now that I understand, I'm not allowed to just be like, well, maybe. I'll think about it, see how I feel, right? Like the picnic. No, it's not like that. People who see Jesus' words as having weight. He says that kind of person is like the people who build the first kind of house. And he says there are other people who hear my words and don't carry them out. So it's optional, right? And so then he uses this illustration of two kinds of houses. And I think we could imagine that the houses would appear similar, right? They're both built, but he says the difference is in the prep and in the stuff that's below the surface. You know, one took the time to dig down and build a foundation that was on the bedrock. And listen, I know, and especially kind of historically, anthropology, different people in different times and places built houses differently. But around here, fortunately, we often build houses similarly to this, right? You can just set a building on the ground, but it's better if you do something to make it more stable. Jesus is saying, imagine two people building a house, and the one guy does it right, and the other guy does it in a way that very likely his original hearers are like, who would do that? How would that even work? How can you build a house just on the ground or on the sand? Like, what would that even look like? But he says, imagine, right? That's kind of ridiculous. And he's like, right, like hearing my word, calling me Lord, Lord, and not doing what I say. And he makes this illustration of these two houses. And in all honesty, if the houses look the same, there's something to be said for the second one. It was done on time and under budget, for sure, right? That's the quickest way. And there's something about that maybe appeals to us. But in both of these houses face a significant weather event. It says there's a storm, and specifically there's a flood. The stream rose and broke its banks, and now we've got a flood situation. This is something that many of us in many places in BC can relate to, right? Sometimes you get fires and floods in the same place. Not trying to bum us out, but just imagine these houses, and okay, now there's a situation where there's a flood. And I think that's a very specific kind of thing that he picks, because a flood doesn't necessarily attack a house directly, right? A house, if it's built anywhere, even partly competently, it's got a roof. So if there's rain, okay, the house is keeping the rain out. Maybe the wind is blowing a little bit, but yeah, in the house, I'm not getting pelted by rain. I can be warm. Yeah, that's all good until the creek rises to the point where now there's water where it shouldn't be, and it's moving. And now the flood is coming against the house. And a flood, even that, doesn't exactly attack the house, but a flood pushes sideways against a house while undermining the ground beneath it. I don't have to get technical about what floods do. Most of us have some experience, and right? They can move all kinds of things, big rocks, big trees, all kinds of, it ends up all over. It's like, that was just water. It's like, yeah, you get enough of it moving, and it's very, very persistent. It can be convincing in its suggestion that everyone just move this way. And so here's this picture of this house, and there's this pressure coming against it. And it's not even so much, the house itself, I'm picturing like a box with a door and windows. It's not, he doesn't say like that. One of the houses was waterproof. It's like, I suspect he wants us to imagine both of these houses have wet floors, right? This is going to be a mess. This is going to be a lot to clean up. Yeah. But the one house collapses. And I don't even think it's like, well, yeah, because he couldn't build square walls. It's because the house moved. Houses aren't designed to move. And once it starts to shift, its structure is designed to stay there, and it can resist rain and even some wind, but if it starts to move, everything starts to, and it just breaks and it just falls over, right? It's not like, it can bend a little bit. Once it starts going, it goes, it breaks, and it comes apart and collapses. And I think, as he tells parables, I think the implication is no one sitting in the crowd would be like, really? I don't think a house would just fall over like that, would it? Like, I think they're like, yeah, no, that would make sense. If you were crazy enough to build a house with all of the weight of a roof and walls and stuff, and it was just on dirt, yeah, you should get out of the house if the creek rises, because that's not going to be safe. But Jesus is not just giving building code instructions. He's talking about lives. Our lives are built similarly to a house. And he says, someone who recognizes me as someone to listen to and comes and actually listens and then does what I say, they are doing something that is parallel to building a foundation under a house. It gives it an ability to withstand pressure that the other kind of life doesn't have. And it's not, the people who don't listen to me at all. It's like, no, the second person that he gives is someone who knows, yep, they're like, Jesus, you are a guy worth listening to. They're taking notes. It's like, got it. But they don't take it as like, this is something I must do. They take shortcuts. They see it as a suggestion. So we see that the issue is this confession without obedience, and he gives a parable of two ways of building. The lesson, I think, in it, at least as I was thinking about it, I think it comes down to not a what, but a who. Because I was looking at the context and trying to put myself in the people's shoes, and the question that came to my mind is like, okay, but what words exactly? Like Jesus is like, anyone who hears these words of mine and does them. It's like, well, does what? And you read back, and he's talking about being anxious. Yeah, don't be anxious. And he's talking about, sharing your faith and all of these. It's like, but what specifically is he talking about? What is the thing that you have to do that's like the foundation? And I think that's missing the point. It's not saying somehow you have to sift through all my words, and there's ones that you somehow, I don't think it's a what, I think it's a who. I think it's the difference of how these different people view Jesus. He says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you don't obey what I say? If we view Jesus as Lord, and that's not a word that we use in non-religious contexts anymore, but it's a term of respect. It's like a king, it's a ruler. If you have a Lord, in an earthly sense, you are under some obligations. This person has the authority and, in a way, ownership of your life and your property. So if they say do a thing, it's not a suggestion. It's not even like I'm going to appeal that. I have my rights. If you have a Lord, you have the rights that Lord gives you. And they say jump, you say how high. We don't love that, right? We've got generations of very independent-minded, my rights as an individual. Other places in the Bible, Jesus suggests that we all have a Lord, whether we know it or not. But if Jesus is our Lord, honestly, his words aren't suggestions. Jesus' words are utterly authoritative. Jesus' words, to use the house illustration, they're not just decoration for the surface. They are to be foundational for our lives. So Jesus' words, if we see Jesus as our Lord, and we actually do, and we're not just saying we do, then the way we understand his words, the bucket they fall into once we hear them, is very different. Jesus' words are authoritative. They're not only authoritative, but they're true if we trust Jesus. Jesus' words are true. They are solidly connected to reality. It's not, well, that's a point of view, but there might be a very different point of view. If you're talking about a couple of humans, yes. If one of them is Jesus, the Son of God, you can take that to the bank. Jesus' words are true. They stand up under pressure. And those who put their trust in him, who build their lives on him, will not be moved under pressure. When everything is like, oh man, the whole context is shifting, right? The idea of the flood, we can kind of see that. It's like, no, you'll be able to stand firm and not be shaken. They're not only true, but they're wise. Jesus actually knows what he's talking about. He knows what we need, what will cause us to thrive as humans. He's not just a guy with an opinion. He's utterly trustworthy. And lastly, and very different from other lords that people, his initial hearers living in first century Palestine, other people throughout history, unlike human lords, Jesus' commands are loving. See, the normal idea, if there's a king or a lord or a ruler or an emperor or whatever, and they've got their subjects, yes, that person's words are authoritative. They are commands. They're not optional. But generally, if you boil it right down, and not to be unfair to the ruler, they are generally for the ruler's good at the expense of his people. It's your duty to bear this expense, right, for the good of the ruler. And Jesus does it totally upside down. What Jesus tells us to do is for our good at his expense. Like, he knows what is going to cause us to thrive. He knows the things that if we ignore these things, your house is liable to collapse. And he is the one that makes the way for us to even do these things. So I think the conclusion before we move into communion is that in this story, the builders have a choice, right? Jesus doesn't say, it's like two people. One of them is given this house and the other's forced to live in this house. And oh, too bad for that guy, his collapse. Like, no, these are people who set out to build something. They have choices. And as we build our lives, just to kind of play out the metaphor here a little bit, there's a lot of things that are handed to us. There's much of our lives that we cannot choose. Where we were born, who our family was, how tall we are, how much hair we have, and how quickly it's leaving. All of those things. We don't get to vote on those, but we do have choices when it comes to coming to Jesus and hearing his words and putting them into practice. And the same way that these theoretical builders who are like, okay, I've got a piece of property and I've got some building supplies, I'm going to make a house. They had the option of doing the hard work of digging and making the foundation, or skipping all that and just building it on the surface. Hey, they look the same and this is quicker. We have choices that we can make, and just like we saw with those builders, our choices have consequences. Essentially saying that Jesus is our Lord, but living in a way that, if we're honest with ourselves, we're not trying to obey him. We're trying to live as comfortably as we can while appearing to be good people. If we're doing that, that's going to have consequences. And sort of like these guys with the houses, they're not necessarily going to happen right away. Jesus doesn't say how long these houses were there, how long they were living in these houses. But eventually the consequences are going to show up. I have likely spoken on this parable times in the past, and I feel like, oh, maybe I'm repeating myself, but I want us to notice, at risk of being redundant, that both houses faced the flood. Jesus isn't saying, the one who listens and actually puts my words into practice is like the guy who builds a house that it never gets rained on. The flood never comes near it. It's never under evacuation alert. Like, it's just, man, if you trust me, I will make sure that location, you will have a smooth, like nothing will happen. It's like, nope, both houses faced the flood. A life built on faith and obedience to Jesus is not flood-free. That is something that is consistently taught. Jesus' words are very, very plain, and I say it because I think as people, it is a very easy thing to forget and slip into a gear where we're like, what? I came to Jesus, I listened to his words, I'm even trying to obey them, and then there's water in my basement. Where is God? Does he not love me? A life built on the foundation of Jesus' words, of Jesus being our Lord, does not make it so that we don't face floods. It makes it so that we endure through them. That when the flood comes, our whole life does not collapse, even when we're facing hard things. Jesus promises to never leave us or forsake us, to use the line from the Psalm, right? Even when we go through the valley of the shadow of death, you're with me. Not you help me avoid it. Storms will come, not if, but when, and they bring pressure. And that's a general rule. I'm probably quoting, this is just from me. So you can be like, Jesus didn't say this. This is Jason, but I think I'm right. Pressure, as a general rule, reveals what's beneath the surface. Whether it's what's in this tube of toothpaste, or you're dealing with a pimple, or it's your life events. Pressure will reveal what is beneath the surface, regardless of whether or not you would like that to be the case. And Jesus is saying, listen, pretending to have your life built on me in order to maybe impress me or impress other people, says, is just setting yourself up. You're going to be disappointed when your house comes down, because that isn't what actually saves. That isn't what allows us to endure. The difference is what is beneath the surface. Because if Jesus' words are true, and I believe they are, the whole house can collapse. Your life can collapse. You can build your life in such a way that when the pressure inevitably comes, you have not built the thing to last. And as my wife says, you can't cram for that, right? If there's a flood, it's too late to be like, we should really dig a foundation. Grab a shovel. I think we got some rocks over there. It's like, dude, it's too late. You're about to enter the find out part of your journey. Here we see what's going to happen. And both lives can look good when times are good. But both lives will face storms and pressure, and only one will endure through it. We're going to take communion this morning, and I had mentioned earlier that Jesus' words, in addition to being authoritative and true and wise, are also loving. Because Jesus, unlike other lords, tells us what to do for our good, and he pays the expense for it. And what I mean is that we can build our lives on Jesus' words because of what he did for us. Remember the person Jesus describes, the one that we're trying to emulate, the one who comes to me and hears my words. We can't come to God. We can't like demand a meeting and have him meet us and tell me what I should do. I think I've forgotten, but you need to give me the manual right now. We can't demand anything. And us in our selfish, sinful state, we wouldn't even want to. The Bible says God loved us so much that he sent his son Jesus to die for us, to make a way for us to be restored in our relationship with God. He did that while we were still sinners, not because a bunch of us were just intrinsically good and we're like, please, please, please come and save us. We're saying, mind your own business, and he came anyway. And he came and he lived and let us see his life, and he shared his words so that we could see what the love of God looks like. We could see the kind of life we are designed to live. And yeah, we see that it's often very counterintuitive. It feels in ourselves, in our own instincts, as like, I should look out for me. I should be number one. I should try to protect myself at all costs. And maybe, if I have to step over someone else to get what I need, that should be okay. And Jesus comes and says, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. You thrive the most when you recognize that your life is not your own. He says, whoever would keep his life will lose it. Whoever would lose his life for my sake will find it. Jesus is totally upside down, not because he's weird, but because in our sinfulness, we're not a reliable source of truth. Jesus came, and not just to give us his words, but to make a way for us to hear and to turn to him. So we're going to take communion. I'll ask the team to make their way to the stage. They're going to play a song while we hand out the elements, and then they'll close in a song. And I think Ron tagged some folks to help serve. So if you're going to serve communion, if you'd make your way to the front. Not to stretch the illustration too much, but when we take communion, like this is bread and it's juice in a cup. And it is symbolic of Jesus's body